Have you ever really had to fight for something, to give it everything that you have? And finally, when it's over, it's finished, it's accomplished, it's done, you have this sense of release and of relaxation. You can finally let go. I remember years ago, I ran in the Disney Marathon. You run between the parks. And on that day in Orlando, it was a veritable downpour of rain. It was one of the most miserable moments of my physical life of running this race between the parks. And finally, when I finished that race, 26 miles from the starting line to the finish line, a man threw a space blanket around me and he said, "Well, you'll never have to do this again." There's something about finishing something, accomplishing something, achieving something. And that's what we're about in this final word of Jesus that we see here on the cross. Now remember that Jesus knows that he has 6 hours to live in his human form here on planet Earth. So he very carefully chooses his words because he knows that they're going to be recorded for all people at all times. So he leaves us these 7 themes, these 7 major focuses of his life that he wants us to understand and know and to build into our lives. And so here we have this final word. Remember, the first 2 words were about forgiveness to soldiers and to a thief on the cross. The third word was a word of comfort to his beloved John and to his mother. And then he turns his attention to God himself. I thirst. I'm thirsty. I'm forsaken. It is finished. And then we come to this final word, which is a word of humiliation leading to exaltation. Luke records these words for us in the 23rd chapter, verse 44 of his gospel. He writes, "It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two." Luke records 4 things for us that happened when Jesus died. Now, I know at first glance it seems like the whole crucifixion thing took about 1 hour. It was kind of a quick event. But on closer examination, we find that it took 6 hours, from 9 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The terminology here, it comes from the Hebrew because the Hebrews had no clock. So they considered the first hour to be dawn, about 6 o'clock in the morning. The third hour was around 9 o'clock in the morning. The 6th hour was noon. And the 9th hour, when Jesus died, was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So Jesus is crucified from the 3rd hour to the 9th hour, from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the day. And then we find in these hours that the first 3 hours that people dominate the scene, Jesus' response and interaction with people. But in the last 3 hours, his focus and his direction is upon God himself. And the first thing that God does is to reveal his power in this moment. The first thing he does is turn off the lights. It got dark. Unexpectedly, without warning, the world goes dark. Darkness falls on the land like a thick blanket. The soldiers are jumpy. They pitch campfires. People are screaming. There's no sun. There's no light. It is absolute darkness. Nature is bowing to the Creator. And if you're anything like me, as human beings, we don't like the dark. That's where things go bump in the night. It gets scary in the dark. In fact, they tell us that human beings are the only animal that is afraid of the dark, that my dog's not afraid of the dark, but I am. I just don't like the dark. We're built that way. We are built to not like dark, because dark is bad news and light is good news. Light feels good, dark feels bad. So God turns out the light here to get our attention and to show the whole world that we're not in control, that God is. And anytime he chooses to turn out the lights, he can turn out the lights. God is in charge. If you'll recall back in the Old Testament, we see the 9th plague. Can you imagine living through this time where God stretches out his hand and darkness falls on the earth for 3 full days? The darkness could be felt. It was so thick and so real. It was the judgment of God upon the people of Egypt. But can you imagine, put ourselves in their shoes for just a moment, what it would be like to live in darkness, not know what caused it, and not know if it was going to ever end or how long it would last. They are in darkness for 3 full days. It is a moment of horror for the people in Egypt. Well, that's just a sign of what God is doing here on the cross. In these 3 hours when Jesus dies, it got dark, and the people did not know how long that darkness was going to last. 750 years earlier, a prophet by the name of Amos, a little shepherd from a town in Tekoa who was sent to prophesy to the kingdom of Israel, he wrote these words in Amos chapter 8, verse 9. On that day, and he's referring now to this coming day of judgment upon the people. On that day, declares the Lord God, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight. I will make the sun go down at noon and make the earth go dark in broad daylight. Imagine the power of this prophecy that is now being fulfilled. How do we explain that? The power of the prophetic word of God. The only Son of God is now being sacrificed. And so the sun goes down, prophesied by Amos, at noon, and darkness fills the earth in broad daylight. It's amazing how the Bible is filled with imagery, the imagery of light and darkness, that the closer we get to God, the lighter it becomes, the more brightness there is. And the further away from God, like the scapegoat, we get cast out into the wilderness, into the utter darkness. Yeah, we don't like dark. We weren't created that way. It's not in our DNA. We're not created to live that way forever in eternity. And God gives us a taste of that darkness here in this world. You might be feeling that you're going through a period of darkness this very moment. It's not God's design. It's a result of our fallenness and our brokenness, but it invades into our lives. But the good news of the gospel is one day God will put an end to all of that darkness for those who have loved in his Son, Jesus Christ, and trusted in him, and we will live forever in the light. Now, what's taking place here is that when Jesus takes on the sins of the world, the fallenness, the brokenness of you and me and everybody who's ever lived, God can't look at his Son any longer, so he curses him, and he is cast out into the utter darkness. For 3 hours, God turns out the lights, and it got dark. There is a second thing that happens when Jesus dies. Matthew records in chapter 27, verse 51, these words, and behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. Not only is it dark, but the veil of the temple is torn in two in the midst of that darkness. Now, you'll recall that the temple represents the presence of God in the midst of the people of Israel. And there are 3 rooms in that temple. There's the outer room, the holy room, and then there's that perfect cube, 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet, the Holy of Holies. It's dark in the Holy of Holies. It holds the Ark of the Covenant, and inside the Ark of the Covenant are 2 things. There are the stone tablets of the law, and there is the manna by which God fed the people in Israel. And they are guarded by these 2 great cherubim. It's dark in that room. It's dark in that room because the doorway is covered with a thick piece of heavy fabric, 30 feet high and 4 inches thick. This veil, this curtain, symbolizes and represents the barrier between a holy God and his fallen people. The purpose is to keep people, us, people like you and me, away from the presence of God so that presence can be pure. But there is one exception. One day a year, on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, the great high priest is permitted to enter into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the Ark of the Covenant with the blood of a slain innocent lamb who has died for the sins of the people. Their sins have been imputed to that lamb. They've been transferred to that lamb who was slain, and then that blood is thrown on the ark. To do that, the priest has to go around this great, thick, heavy veil and curtain to get into the Holy of Holies. When he gets in there, it's dark. And he throws this blood, and then he leaves, comes back around the veil of the Holy of Holies, and he is done with his priestly act at that moment. It all symbolizes how the people are separated from God, but by an intermediary can a sacrifice be made. And in this case, it's the great high priest. Well, on the cross, Jesus is our great high priest. He enters the Holy of Holies. And what he does, he rips the veil of the temple. It is split. It is broken. It is destroyed. The partition that separates us from God can never, ever again be put back together. It is destroyed. The good news of this day is that now we have access to God without a human intermediary. We can go directly to Jesus Christ as our intermediary between us and God. He is the one who makes the sacrifice. We can talk to Jesus and he will talk to God. Or we can go directly to God and speak with Jesus at our side as our advocate standing before us. We have now complete, total access to God. It's been opened up. And keep in mind when this happened, that Jesus put out of business the whole Hebrew system of priests and temples and sacrifices. It's now obsolete for you and I who live in the last age, the new age. There's nothing else to do. The veil of the temple has been destroyed. We have direct, immediate access with God this very moment. You want to say something to God right now? You can say it without an intermediary. Well, there's something else that happens at this moment. Matthew also records that there was a great earthquake in Jerusalem. He links together the tearing of the veil and this great earthquake. The ground begins to shake. People are standing there around the cross in the dark. People are in Jerusalem and the ground begins to shake. It's so powerful, he tells us, that the rocks were split in two. It's a high Richter scale number that's taking place that brought the city to a screeching halt. Buildings are shaken to their foundations. They begin to crumble. People are scared. They're in the dark. The earth is shaking. They're afraid. They are terrified of what's taking place at this moment. There's never been a day like this in the history of the world. And Matthew records a fourth thing that takes place. Listen to this. Listen. Matthew 27, verse 52. The tombs were also opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to the many. This is a scary day. It's dark. The veil has been shredded and ripped in two. The earth shakes. And now bodies appear in the graveyard outside of Jerusalem. Imagine how frightening and unsettling that must be. Something is wrong, the people thought. This must be the end of the world. There never has been a day like this in the history of the world, ever. And Matthew, who's an eyewitness, says the earthquake tore away the stones of the tombs so that the saints, now that these aren't just random people, they're the saints. They're special people. We think they could be the Old Testament saints that are arising, that were buried there in the graveyard in Jerusalem. They could be followers of Jesus who had died and were buried outside of Jerusalem. They're special people. They are saints. They are ones who have been looking either forward or at the coming of the one, Jesus Christ. Now their tombs are open. The rocks are split open. You can see them walking around in the tombs. They're walking around in the graveyard at this moment. They don't leave the graveyard. Matthew tells us they wait there for 3 days, and then at the moment of the resurrection, they begin to make their way into Jerusalem. The many head inside the city walls at the moment of the resurrection and appear to those who they knew and appear to those who they didn't know. Well, what's going on here? Well, I don't understand everything that's taking place. No one does. Matthew doesn't tell us everything. They had to go back to those tombs again and had to have great stones rolled back over those tombs. They probably were not resurrected, and I know this is a technical distinction, but there were people in the Old Testament who were resurrected, and people in the New Testament, Jairus' daughter, the widow of Nain's son, Lazarus, were resurrected. They were dead, buried, and gone. They resurrected. The only part of the resurrection that was the bad news is that when you were resurrected, then you had to die again and go through that whole process again, and the mourning of those who loved you. Well, we don't think these people had to go through all of that experience again. Something happened to them and they got back into the tombs. The point is, it's a spooky, scary day. God is drawing our attention, the attention of the people that were there at that time, that something unprecedented is taking place. The sign is clear that Jesus has the power over death itself. He has overcome death. There are dead people that are walking around. He is resurrected, is going to be resurrected. That death is simply, for the believer, a portal through which we pass from death to life. Death is not the end of death, it's just a different kind of existence. The body, the physical, dies, but the soul, the spirit, it lives forever in eternity. And it lives in one of two places, either in eternal darkness in hell or in the place of eternal light in heaven. So this symbolism of darkness to light, of death to resurrection is taking place at this moment in Jerusalem. Well, it's now and only now that Jesus speaks. In Luke chapter 23, verse 46, we read, "Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, 'Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.' And having said this, he breathed his last." Then, and only then, Jesus calls out, and notice Luke says here, with a great shout in a loud voice. He is now on the exaltation side of the cross. He's being restored. And so he has a word to his Father, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." The gospel writers don't record that Jesus simply died. They refer to the spirit, to the soul, to the pneuma, the essence, the being of Jesus. A translation of this in the Greek, the way the Greek really reads, is, "Into the hands of you I commit the spirit of me." And then, when he surrendered himself, when he released himself to his Father, mission accomplished, he let go. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. His muscles relax, his head falls to his chest, and he dies. The law has been satisfied. The ransom is paid. Access is gained. Relationship with God is restored. Redemption is acquired. There is nothing more for him to do. So, in the dark, he died. And when he did, it got light. Well, what's going on here? Well, at a human level, God is trying to say, I understand how dark can get. I know how scary life can get. I know what it's like to be betrayed or beaten or left alone for dead. I know what you're going through. Whatever it is you're going through, I have been there. I have experienced it myself. He understands us. He understands everything about us. Every dark moment, every moment when we're terrified beyond that which we think we can possibly endure, Jesus understands us. He understands that. And he knows. And I'd encourage you to just go and tell him what you're thinking or feeling this very moment. Maybe you're angry at God. Well, tell him that. Or maybe you feel like he's let you down. Tell him that. He can handle that. He's a big God. He's heard that before. Tell him. Maybe you just want to pray and throw out some prayer requests that you desperately need answered. Just ask him. Beg him. Tell him. But at the same time, say, nevertheless, not thy will, but thine be done, because my view of an outcome may not be the best thing for me, but God has that eternal perspective in mind. So just come to him. That's what he's saying here right now. I get it. I understand you. I know you. And then there's this divine perspective. Right smack dab in the middle of something very, very bad, God does something very, very good. In the darkness, there is light and there's redemption for you and me. The minute we close our eyes in this world, we will be opening our eyes in the next world, and we will be opening our eyes into either full, utter darkness or complete, restored brightness in the presence of God. At the divine level, God is saying, I am redeeming you. I am restoring you eternally. And that may not be a big deal to you right now at this moment, but when you close your eyes in this world and open them into the next, it will be a very big deal for you. So the only question remains is, how have you and I responded to this great message? At some point in all of our lives, each of us has to make a choice. We have to act individually. Now, for some, asking Jesus Christ into your life to save you from your sins and brokenness and fallenness, that might be some brand new information, like it was for me when I was 17 years old. But I understood that when I gave my life to Jesus, and it wasn't a perfect prayer and it wasn't a perfect life, and certainly hasn't been a perfect life, but it did change the whole trajectory of my life, of where you go to college and who you marry and how you raise your kids and how you build your career, where you live, what kind of lifestyle you have, how you spend your money, and where you spend eternity. Yeah. God is still ready, willing, and able to enter into a personal relationship with you and me, just like he did those people that day in Jerusalem. And maybe this Easter season, you can pray that prayer and say simply, God, come into my life. I've tried my way. Now I want to try your way through your Son, Jesus Christ.